a red flag flying here.
Hello and welcome to Socialist Think Tank. Today I'm speaking to a good friend of mine, Musa Askari. Hi, Musa.
Hello, Paul. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, you're very, very welcome here. So we're just going to get straight into it here. We're talking about socialism. So what is socialism to you?
Somehow I knew you would start there because most of your interviews start in that place, so I probably have a lead into that one. I think for me, just a purely personal statement, it's an extension or an emanation of my own sort of spiritual journey, really. It comes out of a desire only in recent years, last 3 years or so, to try and practically get involved in trying to help deal with some of the problems that we're facing today in the world, really, from a local point of view to maybe a national point of view. So it's an extension of my spirituality, and that spirituality for me is to do with interfaith spirituality and not disappearing into the hills somewhere in terms of your own journey, but being engaged with the world. And for me, socialism is a branch of that, and it involves all the things that anybody would want to do, which is to care for people, to show compassion, to show empathy, to lift people up who are down, and also to give opportunity to people who may otherwise struggle. To make the world fairer, the catch-all phrase being social justice. So that's how I would pitch it for now.
It's really interesting to me that you've gone to a spiritual route here. So spirituality, I think a lot of people really don't understand what that means or may have a different definition. So what do you think spirituality is? Is it a religious thing, or could you be a spiritual atheist, or, what is spirituality to you?
I think it could be all of those things. It's a very hard thing to pin down. I've asked a number of people of that in things I've been engaging with, and it is a very difficult thing to try and give a specific crystal answer to. And I like that. I like the fact that it is undefinable, and in that it has its power because it can be lent to all kinds of things that are uplifting. But more traditionally, you could say it emanates out of a religious sensibility, whether to practice your religion more outwardly, more orthodoxly, or the phrase that's been doing the rounds for recent years has been spiritual but not religious. So you may not be inclined to practice your faith overtly, publicly, or however, but innerly you are living that faith as fully as you can, and that is your spiritual life. So for me, it didn't need to, and this is for many decades, it didn't need to remain a closed, hidden, private affair, knowing that we live in a secular society, and that's totally understandable. But it doesn't mean that your spirituality can't have expression, in the normal everyday life. So yeah, it's an intangible thing. You don't necessarily, in my view, have to be an overtly religious person or a believing person, because that would be quite pretentious to say, well, it's only for the opportunity for people who are faith. Well, you might have faith in humanity. You might have faith in the goodness of everyday people. That is a faith, and you express that through a kind word or a good gesture, or actively getting involved in some community work. So yeah, it's vague, and I like it like that.
So with regards to spirituality, and people having a shared spirituality sort of thing, regardless of faith, is that kind of what you're going for there? Do you think people share a certain level of spirituality regardless of what faith that they have and what their beliefs are, that there's a certain human quality that sort of needs spirituality, do you think?
I think it's automatic. I don't think it's even to be aimed for deliberately. I think it's an awareness of consciousness that even though you may belong to different traditions, and you could apply that to a secular life, different traditions on the left or the right of politics or the center left, there is a consciousness in which you all share, which is to make the world a better place, to improve people's lives, etc. So that general collective consciousness, I think, is part of that spirituality. It comes from that spiritual awareness. It doesn't have to be a religious sensibility. For some people, it may be exactly that. It may be a manifestation of their own religious life, and that's fine. And for others, it may not be. But the beauty is that both of them are talking about the same awareness. And on the side of socialism, as it were, the most beautiful thing that we have is the word solidarity. And that should be something that helps you transcend divisions, rather than as can happen and has been happening, to control and to subdue, to keep certain voices at bay. For the sake of solidarity, hold back. I say go forward. So yeah, I think socialism has a spiritual tinge, has a spiritual color, has a spiritual rainbow, whatever you want to go for, and you should express it more. And solidarity is one of the most beautiful things that it has going for it.
So solidarity, it's a really interesting concept, solidarity, because lately we've seen it used during the coronavirus crisis. A lot of the people who were traditionally on the right wing of politics were talking about solidarity with one another, talking about solidarity with their fellow human beings during that crisis. I believe Richie Sunak used the term solidarity, and I believe Boris Johnson did as well. But a couple of years ago, people on the left were being mocked, for saying things like solidarity, and it was quite a taboo phrase almost. So, what do you think solidarity is?
I think it is the rock that you stand on and the glue that holds you together through difficult times. Whether it was the miners' strike, and I'm passing over that by just saying the miners' strike, but to be honest, I'm not as informed about it as I should be. The work that went on behind the scenes of how people helped each other, from keeping kitchens going to have food being helped, to go to different households, and financially how they were supporting each other. I don't know, I mean, you could call it spirituality, but that is to me solidarity, sticking by each other through thick and thin, as it were. The other word that has become taboo, unfortunately, and it shouldn't be, is comrade. Comradely spirit. What's wrong with that? This is where a sort of identity hypnosis comes into it, pointing to previous times of what comrade comes from and where it might lead to a different country, a different time. But socialism here has its own ecosystem. And I don't know why people are afraid or hesitant to use the word comrade. I think it's a beautiful term, like spirituality. I would like the current leadership of the Labour Party to be using it, and unpacking it, and not using it. I'm not saying the leadership are, but some factions maybe, to say that's unpopular. Well, I don't know what all the groups are that have been set up by community groups if they're not comradely, showing solidarity. And you may not even have to use the word. We might say that manifestation of community togetherness from a socialist point of view is solidarity. From another point of view, it might be called a social enterprise. I mean, I wouldn't say that. For me, that's not enough. That's not strong enough. There's a depth and resonance to the word solidarity that doesn't exist with other terms. Same with comrade. So yeah, I don't think there's any reason. And the right wing of politics may want to borrow it, but they're only borrowing it. They don't own it.
It's interesting what you were saying there about other countries and things, and it reminded me of a time I saw a friend writing something on Facebook, and this friend is from a mining community, same age as me, but brought up during the miners' strike, and his parents were miners, and someone had criticized Polish people to him and said something racist about Polish people, and this he's a nice he's a nice person, but I wouldn't necessarily say he would always stand up against racism in this way. And he said, don't ever criticize Polish people. When I was 6, the only Christmas present I got was because Polish people sent presents over for the children of the miners' strike. And it's interesting that people so locally remember that, and it's so important to them. And actually, I think that flies in the face of a lot of what we're told about people from, mining communities having, it's often kind of portrayed in the media that these people are racist or xenophobic, and I don't believe that's the case. Actually, I believe that there are good people who understand that there are good people around the world. So it's really interesting, and I love what you said about camaraderie and being a comrade. And I like the term comrade. Comrade to me means trusted friend, someone who has solidarity with me. It's such a big thing. So I'm really pleased that you brought up those things. I'm going to ask you now about, growing up, and did you always feel like you were a socialist, or was socialist a label that came a little bit later?
Would you mind if I just quickly commented on your Polish friend?
Of course.
So I think the thing that comes out for me there, just hearing for the first time, is that stories are a way to transcend, to cut through, and ignite, the spirit within, humanity. So that person may not be the best advocate for racial harmony, or so forth, but yet that doesn't mean he or she is immune to an experience that was beautiful. I think we should hear these stories more. And one of the things I really am saddened about since joining the Labour Party about 3.5 years ago is that we don't hear stories enough. We don't hear enough about everyday members from all over the country, wherever they are, being maybe showcased or whatever is not the issue, but just generally hearing everyday stories of their own struggles, of their own difficulties, because it's somewhat painted that members or members of parties are somewhat separate, but they're part of the everyday community that you and I live in. They have stories. So I think for me, that's very important, that no matter what's going on, find a story. I don't mean as a journalist, but find a story that connects that person to something greater. And I think that's really important. In terms of me, my journey, I don't know, maybe I've always been a socialist in terms of my practical, everyday political experience and who I've voted for. I've always voted for Labour ever since I could vote, obviously. But I wouldn't have said I outwardly identify as a socialist. But now I'm getting more comfortable with it. I do have a problem with taking on labels and garments. I'm not averse to the term socialist at all, but it takes me a long time to get comfortable in the clothes that I'm wearing of identity, because I've deliberately, particularly in the last decade or so, I've gone out of my way to consciously shed identities in my own psyche of how I see myself. And that's a different story. So on that basis, I'm a bit hesitant to put on the mantle, but I will put on, I'll put on the rosette. I'll go campaigning, and as I've done wherever I could or felt inclined to, and not hide the fact that I'm part of the Labour Party. So yeah, I'm a socialist, but I wear it lightly. I don't wear it dogmatically. I try and wear it gently, and hopefully that may attract other people to hear about it generally, in everyday life. So I think I've always been there. Now I'm giving it more body, by being active, by bringing it to life. It's interesting. Maybe more down the road, I'll be able to reflect on it more, but it's not been without its challenges. And it's not been without some illusions being shattered about what politics is and what politics could be, and why it doesn't work. But yeah, I think the age that we're in now, the reason why socialism is being tried to be sidelined, or whether it's the media or whether it's other factions, etc., who may be doing it, because they know it is the power that will solve a lot of problems. I don't believe that socialism is the be-all and end-all of all of humanity's problems, but in terms of material well-being, as well as psychological well-being, of all the pressures that the material discomfort brings, socialism has a lot of solutions. Why wouldn't you want it? And one of the reasons you wouldn't want it is because it's a direct challenge to power and authority, who are in control of many facets of our lives. We're very free in the West here, particularly in the UK, but things are changing. And those winds of change were coming, last 5 years or so in particular, but earlier than that, from what my father was talking to me about. So yeah, I think socialism has a lot of answers, and the resistance that it's facing, you can draw a lot of energy from that and confidence. I know a lot of members recently, particularly since the general election, have thought about leaving the party or have left the party. I've been bemused by that, because, yeah, I mean, I was disappointed with the result. I was disappointed for that kind of politics that didn't come to power. I came to politics in terms of joining the party because of Corbyn, the beauty of Corbyn, the humanity of Corbyn. But the Labour Party isn't Corbyn exclusively. He is a very big part of it and its history. And he drew me to it, like thousands and millions that came. But I'm bemused why people feel they have to leave to protest, when that protest could be more effective by standing exactly where you are. It's difficult. I know it's a bit judgmental of me, probably, judgmental full stop, but, I'm on a different trajectory. 3.5 years, I don't have the scars of 40 years of having to strive and having to battle against this, that, or the other internally within the party, from membership and so forth, and all the shenanigans that may happen in any party. So I don't have that baggage. Maybe I'm more optimistic despite the result. So yeah.
There were so many tangents we could have gone on there. There's so many interesting things that you said. One of the things you mentioned your father there, and I know a little bit about your father because I've watched the videos that you've shared on Facebook, but just briefly, could you introduce a little bit about what your father and how he's influenced how you see the world?
Yeah, that's very kind of you. It's really, he's my guru. I'm from an Islamic tradition, so you could say he's my, sheikh, as it were, if it was a Sufi master, or the Sufi spirituality. He's my mentor. He's my friend, and I was very fortunate to have his comfort, his counsel, his wisdom, and the rest of my life is really dedicated to making sure his work progresses and is shared widely. That's the only reason why I'm here, really. But because of his awareness about the injustices in the world, that's where you start from. I think a lot of people have different touch points, but it was him really that awakened me to the injustices that are existing in the world globally, particularly about concentrations of military power, particularly about injustices of global economics, and poverty, and also the injustices of fascism, of extremism. So hearing him talk, hearing him lecture, reading his work has influenced me greatly. And his background is he started in sociology. He taught sociology for 20 odd years in India, and then he himself said he found the limits of sociology. He'd reached those limits, and he couldn't answer for him greater questions. So he moved to philosophy, he moved to interfaith spirituality, and was involved very early on in the fledgling movement of interfaith dialogue, when the World Council of Churches was initiating dialogue with world religions. And from that, he went to different conferences around the world, from India, and that brought him to the West to teach here. And because of that, we moved to India. We moved to England 40 plus years ago. Otherwise, I'd probably still be living in India, carrying on my life there. So I was very young when I came, 8 or 9. Grew up here, junior schools, secondary school, and all of that. But it's him really that would give me the compass with which to try and navigate or investigate or be curious about the world, to try and hear people. But for him, the most important thing was to talk not only between world religions and dialogue, but also to talk between people of faith and people of non-faith in terms of traditional religious faith, so humanists. So faith-based humanists and secular humanists should be in dialogue. And that was towards the last 10 years of his life or so, which probably has led me to this path here, to engage with some of the people I've engaged with over the years, piecemeal, but I'm grateful for that engagement. So yeah, it's a brushstroke, but thank you for asking about him.
That's okay. It's actually quite fascinating to hear about your father and what he did, and it's a really exciting thing that he did, groundbreaking in many ways. So, he had a theory about hypnosis, didn't he? About a sort of group hypnosis. Is that right?
Well, it was Jung really. It wasn't him. He was quoting Carl Jung, and I haven't read Jung at all really much. Maybe odd bits here and there, but it was Carl Jung he was quoting, which was collective hypnosis, and how Marx might call opium of the masses, or other people might call other things. So Jung settled on collective hypnosis or collective identity hypnosis, and this is what was the warning that my father was giving in early 90s, particularly in his 1995 speech on spiritual humanism, which was to say, as human beings, you've heard of the phrase, we put each other in boxes and we looked at through certain lenses and so forth. But for him, and he awakened me to this sort of consciousness, was all of your identities have a risk factor. So, your name, your nationality, the language, the culture, the religion that you follow or are born into, and all the subsets that go from that. So all of those are individual garments that we're putting on. And the more tightly we cling to them, the more vociferously we try and defend them. And defend them against who? Others who are equally clinging to their identity. That led me to, so that creates a hypnosis, that, the attraction to one's identity so tightly, so dogmatically, before we get to racism, before we get to fascism, before we get to all kinds of problems, practically, politically, just in here, psychically, in your own psyche, how you see yourself. The attraction to hold on to one's identity so tightly is a danger. And that's why it manifests itself, in my view, in the term national interest. You see, every country has got a national interest, as you appreciate. But there's coming to a point now, we are here now, in my view, and I'm sure many others would concur, that competing national interests is not the way to go. With finite resources, competing national interests is not the way to go, because of what the climate is telling us. So yeah, collective identity hypnosis, and that's why I arrived after he passed away. The sort of maxim or the phrase that I go by, which is I cling to my identity, or any identity I have, lightly, not tightly. It informs my thinking. How could it not? But it's not exclusively who I am. So, for example, I was born in India. I'm British. I speak Urdu. Not fluently, I speak Urdu. I can't write Urdu. The prayers, some of the prayers I recite in my spirituality are Arabic, but some of the other prayers I recite are in English. I speak English. My children speak English, but they don't really speak Urdu that much. And the food I eat is of a particular cuisine, inclination. All of these are identities. Whether we recognize them or not, they are the fabric of how we live. So my view is, yes, it's all very well good, sharing things and, saying we want to live in a multicultural world, etc. But in what fashion? How tightly do you want to live like that? And the problems that we're facing are not so much to do with the extremes of that, but this misunderstanding in some aspects of our life, which is reflected in the word tolerance. Or let's tolerate each other, we should get on, everyone should have tolerance. If the world had a bit more tolerance, I think we're at a maximum of our tolerance. We've reached peak tolerance and things are flipping, things are splintering in certain places. And that's because tolerance for me creates friction. There's to tolerate something, ultimately there is a degree of friction involved. You're putting up with something, however casually, however innocently, but in the back of your mind, you don't completely agree. You have some question marks about it. Now, if that question mark is based, in my view, on genuine inquiry, on some kind of self-growth and learning, then for me, that's not tolerance. That's quest, that's journey. But tolerance is, I think we've reached, certainly coming to very close to the maximum of tolerance as humanity. We need to go beyond. And for me, that means clinging to our identities a bit less dogmatically. And that creates problems now because of patriotism, of nationality. We should repackage the word patriotism in a more universalistic way without diluting someone's history. I'm not saying don't feel proud of your heritage, whatever that is. Don't feel affection about it. But for me, there's no value in that heritage if you cannot express it beautifully, if you cannot express it lovingly. If you're expressing it dogmatically, angrily, you're saying it's superior, subliminally to some extent. And it doesn't work, not for me. And it creates a lot of problems. I've gone on a lot there. Sorry about that, Paul, but identity, yeah.
It's absolutely fine that you're going. I was really, really interested. And there are a lot of things that are coming out of that for me, because I think we see in the national debate at the moment, it's actually a lot of right-wing people are furious about identity politics. They keep on saying, oh, it's always about identity politics. A lot of them speak about different genders. A lot of them speak about different races, and they are growing tired of tolerance, as you say, and they're doing to that. And I think it's interesting, given that a lot of these identities are given to us. So the idea that there's male and female, and they have to be very rigid role-wise, that's an identity that is given to us. And your nationality, your race, genetically, there isn't a race. There's one race genetically, the human race. And race is a construct, and it was actually constructed in order to justify a lot of very poor behavior. So it's very interesting for me, and I hope to you as well, to see the backlash there with from the right wing, who seem to hate identity politics, when actually identity politics is used to drive a wedge between people, and socialism is trying to bring people together.
Yeah, I think that I would go along with that. I would agree with that. And one of the reasons why that backlash is happening, in my view, is because of their strict adherence to dogmatic, religious, in the sense of religious exclusivism, that it is this way and no other way. No nuance, no spirituality, no learning. It is this or nothing else. It's finite, and there's no discussion about it. There's no question about it. So that identity is under threat, particularly when it comes to gender. Now, this is something that I think is a great opportunity to explore, that even if gender is up for question, and it should be, there's not a doubt about it. I mean, I don't have any issue, and it's not my right to even have an issue with how somebody wishes to identify themselves in terms of gender. because I have another concept that goes beyond that for me, my thinking. But yes, that is challenging the basic fundamentals of your material existence. Roles, misogyny, everything. If someone says they're no longer identified as a man, and now they identify as a woman, my first question is of amazement, of wonder, of thinking, okay, tell me more. I mean, how? I'm interested in that journey. It's a spiritual journey for me to try and migrate, as it were, your own consciousness, and also physically, because before the physical expression of that, however somebody wants to take that forward in their own life, innerly, psychically, psychologically, they've gone through a tremendous leap, and it might not have been instant, it might have been over years, and the challenges that are faced by doing that, I think we haven't even begun to understand it, because those voices are not being given expression, and they should be, because there is so much we could learn from that. Just it could inform my own life better. Some of the problems that I might be having in my own thinking, the solutions could lie in the journey of how somebody's talking about their trans life, as it were. Yeah, we're not questioning enough about it, but it is a threat, and the reply is frightening, and we should show solidarity, in my view, and less judgment, more willingness to understand, without feeling threatened. I mean, how is my own whatever? I mean, if I said the word masculinity, I don't even feel comfortable saying it. I mean, how is my own masculinity or my main maleness affected by somebody else saying they do identify in this way? I mean, what difference does that make to me physically and materially? None. But psychically, it might make a huge amount of difference to someone else about how they see their own role in life. And we should help. We should help them understand. Now, some people you just cannot, because it's dangerous. They're not interested. And we should, step away and take the precautions. But there are vast numbers of people who are not like that. And let's have that discussion and give space and voices to people who are talking and not hog the limelight, as it were. It's same thing with Black Lives Matter. The voices that need to come forward, and the identity challenge that's coming because of that, is all part of the same mix. I mean, we call it intersectional at the moment, and whilst I think that's a functional term, I don't particularly like it. I don't think it's strong enough. I don't think it's good enough to say intersectional solidarity. It's too sociological. It's not spiritual enough for me, but it will do for now.
So, earlier on, you mentioned that we should cling to our identities very lightly, and I think that's some really good advice to all of us, because it respects who we are, it respects what our values are, it respects all of the things that you can be proud of or maybe not so proud of in your own heritage, but like allows you to understand others as well. I really like that. So how would someone go about clinging to their identity very lightly? Was that the term you used? Clinging to it lightly?
That's very difficult to answer, because I don't know how I actually did it myself to some degree. I mean, I'm not saying I've done it completely. I can't have done, because my thought process is affected by the identity I have and whatever, but certainly try and cling to it lightly. I don't exactly know how you do it process-wise, because I don't like the word process either, in terms of how we see things. But I think the beginning has to be a curiosity about who you are. And going back to the trans journey that we talked about, that's a question of who I am. And they look at themselves, or I look at myself, and I maybe don't recognize myself, or I'm a stranger to myself. Certain behaviors that I have, I don't appreciate, or I don't welcome, or other things I'm curious about. So I think it's not being self-centered, but it's asking about oneself in a very deep and curious way. We think we know ourselves to some degree because of the life we live. We think because we have, maybe we think, I'm being judgmental or too authoritative there, I don't know, but there's a case of saying, okay, my earliest memory is here, age X, and all the events, although I don't remember every single instance of my life, but all the events up to here, you remember the macro events and some subtle events that are beautiful, and others are very deep and painful that you might have forgotten or suppressed or whatever. But you've got this track and you've got this history that you're now replaying in your mind, and you think, that's me. When it might not actually be all of you. It's some of you. It's some of who you are because of your awareness and consciousness about it. But there's a lot there that we just haven't known. So I like the phrase "to know thyself." It's a spiritual phrase from all different traditions. So I think to cling to one's identity lightly, I think it's a natural progression of inquiry, of questioning who you are. And the same, I go back to Black Lives Matter, because the question Black Lives Matter, I think one of the major questions they're asking is, do you really know who you are as a country, how we are, as a colonial past, all that history. There's no cancel history involved. There's no cancel culture. What Black Lives Matter is saying, or one of the main important things is saying, this is the history you know. Let me fill in these blanks that you've sort of removed from that tapestry, and know yourself better. I'm not asking to remove anything. I'm asking actually to raise something that may not, you've hidden. And one of the reasons you've hidden it, because it's ugly, it's unjust, and the false identity. And I mean nationally. I'm not speaking individually about any particular individual, but collective awareness of our lives as a country. Well, the false identity we've set ourselves, or the narrative that we've got, it could be improved, no doubt, and so I think all of that leads you to, in my view, a natural progression to cling to identity lightly, so that when Labour Party brings forward the 2017 manifesto or the 2019 manifesto or any socialist manifesto, it should land more sympathetically on a lot more ears, in my view, because, and this goes back to something that other people, particularly here in the Northeast, that I hear a lot about, if it wasn't for the pandemic of social distancing, I would definitely want to get involved, is community activism, community work, the day-to-day engagement. Councillors are doing it now, and they're the only ones who are having to do it, unfortunately, at the moment, and they don't have the help. But that community activism, that day-to-day engagement, is really trying to piece together, in my view, the landscape in which a policy comes and it's more sympathetically understood, that you're not losing anything. The well-being of my neighbor is really my well-being, but we are a million miles from that in some of the stuff. If you look at social media, if you look at some of the battles that are going on within the Labour Party right now, it's distressing, really. But yeah, I think if we can raise that awareness of self-curiosity, of curiosity about nationality, of curiosity, what does it really mean? For me, it might not mean to cling into your identity lightly, but it might mean that you express it more affectionately. You express it less dogmatically. Because beauty, I think, is more attractive than revulsion. Why would you want to scare somebody into voting for the Labour Party or any party? That's how certain factions and parties get elected for decades, because of fear. Well, the Labour Party should be the antithesis of that, not play into that. That's why I've joined, to support that narrative, along with other things. So yeah, I think all of that, it's not the apex of what should happen, but it's definitely, for me as an individual, part of that journey and emanation. I know this is very vague, but we are in conversation rather than an interview.
It's really interesting to explore these things with you, and I don't expect you to be able to answer these questions, but by exploring them, we can kind of learn quite a lot. I was thinking there while we're talking about identity, and a lot of what my brain went to when we're talking about identity politics is people very strongly identifying with, say, Britain being a Christian nation, whether or not that's true, Britain being a white nation, whether or not that's true, like historically. But then I started thinking about, say, when things happen to people because of aspects of their identity. So when someone is the victim of racism, that has happened to them because of someone's perceived sense of their identity. And I think that can strengthen that identity in the person. So I've had things happen to me in the past because of, we talked earlier on about solidarity. It's one of the things I value most highly. Therefore, in situations where I have shown solidarity when I have been okay, I've ended up getting myself into situations where I'm all of a sudden not okay anymore because of my solidarity. But I wouldn't change that. And actually, that seems to strengthen this feeling within me because things have happened to me because of my solidarity.
Mm-hmm.
That strengthens my identity as being someone who would show solidarity. So where would that fit in? And I don't expect you to know the answer to this one, to cling into an identity lightly, because for me, that showing solidarity is such a fundamental part of me. I'm almost dogmatic about it. And I think it's quite a positive force in lots of ways, but it can be quite a destructive force in my own life because I would be willing to sacrifice quite a lot in order to show it.
I'm really grateful for that, Paul, because that is new to me, what you said there, and I hadn't actually thought about it in that sense, or in that way you said it there, in the sense of showing solidarity, getting persecuted for it to a sense, to some extent, in terms of whatever the setting is, and the result is that it strengthens your solidarity innerly. For me, I think that one of the best ways to express that, kind of react to that thing, is poetically. You know, I mean, a branch will cling to the trunk from which it emanates as tightly as it can because of the sustenance it's receiving. Similarly, you will, cling to that solidarity as the trunk of your existence, as it were, innerly. Forgive me for being direct, but the expression you've given is so beautiful. Then for me, that's not identity. That is selfhood. It's something greater. It's beyond identity. It's an inner sense of beingness. Again, we're into a vague landscape here in talking, but that's the only way to approach these things, indirectly, because they're so big. It's like one of the poems from Rumi, the famous mystic, I think it's Rumi, is if you placed it in a darkened room, if you place people and you place an elephant in there and ask them to reach out and touch and say, describe an elephant, somebody might just say, well, it's just this trunk, and never know the tail. And well, it's only a tail. And I think we can only know certain things, or the greatness of certain things in people, indirectly. So there's nothing wrong in that. That vagueness, I think, creates spontaneity, creates beauty. So I think, in terms of identity, that it strengthens your identity. That's a linguistic way of saying it. For me, innerly, I don't think that's really. It's higher than identity. What you've said there, for me, it's high. It's a higher status of being. I mean, let's put it conversely. I'm going to assume, and rightly so, because I know you for a little while now, that you showed solidarity because it was the just thing to do. It was for all the universal values, one of the great universal values, or whatever it was, something that needed to be done. You stood up for someone, whatever it was. But for me, that is an elevation of your being. That's something very beautiful, very powerful. And getting persecuted for it, in a sense, is like a gift. Saying it's an affirmation of recognition that it was the right thing to do. Conversely, someone on the other side of the fence who's doesn't have your value system, they may be showing solidarity with a complete person who is the worst person to show solidarity with. They're expressing a different value system. That's not solidarity. That's too tightly clinging to something for dogmatic reasons. So yeah, I think for me, I can fit it into my schema of thought. I don't want to question that if what I'm saying is casting doubts on people saying, well, I think my identity is solidarity. I think solidarity is a higher level of awareness in oneself beyond simply a nationality. And just going back to the earlier point about Britain and Britain being a Christian country or purely white country. Well, materially speaking, there are more ethnically white British than any other. You could say if you accept that category of race, as it were. So what? Nothing to be done about it. That's the reality, and we live and learn and we move forward. But when we say Britain, I think consciously, what do we mean? Do we just mean the island that we're, the map that we're imagining in our mind? Britain and Northern Ireland, Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Are we imagining that little island of Northern Ireland along with Scotland, Wales, Devon and Cornwall? And we think that's Britain? Well, to be a British subject meant beyond these shores. To be a British citizen meant beyond these shores. So if we expand that, and transcend the identity of being British beyond just an island state, I don't mean island mentality, that's a different thing, but an island state, then you go to a global perspective, and that means different ethnicities because of the global footprint that Britain, England, the dominant power, had. So when certain people say, from the Caribbean or different parts of the old, Commonwealth, that they're not seen as British, well, it's a bit of an odd thing to say because they are. There's no doubt about it. And I think that hasn't been. I mean, I don't see in mainstream media or in popular culture that narrative. I don't think has a lot more wind that can be given to that sail to expand our awareness of what being British means. And that can be a beautiful thing. It can be a transformative thing. It doesn't have to be a narrow thing. Why don't we do that? But yeah, I just wanted to comment. And in terms of Christian culture, okay, so be it. You go to India, it's a Vedantic culture mainly. Yes, several centuries of Islamic culture interwoven into that interfaith spirituality. That's where I grew up, or my heritage is, as it were. Here, yes. So what? I mean, there are churches everywhere, and rightly so. That there's nothing to be shrinking away from it. Let's go into those churches and learn. And let's look at the history of how that stained glass window was put together, and what the prayer book says. Why not? But it depends what the sentiment's being invoked when you say Christian country. Is it behind the scenes to be said whiteness? You see, or is it more the spirituality of Jesus? I think the former, sometimes, worryingly. I wish the latter would have more prominence. And it can, through interfaith dialogue, interfaith understanding. And I don't just mean study of religion. People pick up a book, do a GCSE, do an A-level, do a degree, and study religion till forever. But until you've talked to a person of another witness, that spark of engagement, of dialogue, will be absent to you, and your life, my life, will be poorer for it. And I think socialism can help with that. I don't think, obviously, socialism is not, pushing religion. Obviously, it's a secular expression of a political form, but it can inspire a spiritual approach to life through solidarity. You might even want to use the word spiritual sometime. Why not? As a bridge to move from one moment to another, loosely. But it needs leaders to do that, more on a grander scale. Sadly, there's no appetite for that kind of language because it doesn't really win your votes. It confuses the message. It's not easy to put into a meme. How do you do a social media campaign on spirituality? I mean, I would try, but it's not packageable that well. Again, going back to what we said at the beginning, I like its looseness. I like its, that it doesn't conform, because that's its power. It's free of being constrained by outer influences. I think that should happen. But yeah, we live in a Christian country because that's the heritage we were from. If I lived in a different part of the world, it'd be a different heritage. And so what? But India is unique in one sense. My father used to say, there's interfaith experiences in the UK because of the history, and obviously there's every religion in the UK, I would assume that has an expression here. But India, I mean, I could say I come from an Islamic background, but I come from an Islamic background in the context of India, which is a multi-religious, multilingual, multicultural expression, as opposed to someone who says they come from an Islamic background from an exclusively Islamic country. There's that's the subtlety to understand that. And unfortunately, the media doesn't touch that. We won't go into Islamophobia, which is a term I'm not particularly comfortable using, because I don't think Islam is a phobia. It's a faith, an Abrahamic faith. But yes, there are people who definitely have aversion to people who express themselves Muslim outwardly. And that needs to be dealt with all kinds of other discriminations. But yeah, there is a subtlety. This is a Christian country, but it's a secular state. Let's move forward.
I think there's so much we could build upon there, and I think for me this conversation's been really a conversation starter, and I hope some conversations come out of it for the people who watch this, because there's so much to think about, and there's so many different ways you can take it. But I'm going to move towards now how we can take this spiritual idea, this socialist idea, whatever we want to call it, whatever we want to label it, how can we take that forward and build a better society using these ideals for you?
It's so difficult to answer with any confidence, really, and I know you appreciate that. But we can try. Let's try, if we can. Because in that trying, there'll be some hope, I hope. For me, and this is something that I have to go back to for my father's work, which is he would express it in the term of spiritual humanism. Is a term that I know you referred to earlier on, and I haven't gone into it much here. But socialism is humanism in its compassionate expression, okay, of politically organizing life in a particular way, of making the world less greedy. But unfortunately, you cannot legislate for greed. You cannot legislate against greed. And that human nature has to be encouraged to develop. And that will be done by language, by the language that leaders of political parties use, the leaders of industry use, of religious leaders use. The language is going to be very important. So the first thing to do, in my view, is we must choose the right language to help that come about. For me, for that language thing, the main number one thing is encourage self-reflection. Rather than pointing fingers and saying, you, the voter, should be like this, and we got this wrong, so we're going to fix it this way with a new policy, is to pose questions, to encourage reflection. I know this is a 4-year project that the leader of the Labour Party is talking about, that his leadership is for. Well, it's policy light at the moment for me, but it should be reflective high. It should be encouraging a high level of reflection about what's wrong with the world, and pointing out those injustices, not only labeling it at the Tory government, but also encouraging in the public a sense of reflection about what's wrong with the world by posing questions. You could pose it philosophically, you could pose it any way you want, but I think it involves a language that encourages self-reflection, because that will not mean that you're dictating to the public. The public is thinking for themselves. It really annoys me when people say, well, we shouldn't insult the public, and yet we continue insulting the public in terms of some of the things that we talk about in terms of political expression. So language followed by encourages reflection. The other thing is using globalization, not the economic expression of it, but to encourage an awareness of that we are one planet. We are one humanity. I want the word humanity to be at a higher level of in that language than it is at the moment. We always, not always, but sometimes the word humanity comes into question or doubt of what's happened to the world, what's happened to our humanity, when something's gone wrong, either state of the world at the moment. But aside from that, we could be speaking about humanity in a much more grander, universal way to connect socialists, for example. Socialists should be leading this, particularly the Labour Party, is not only having Zoom calls within the UK between CLPs, etc., but also Zoom calls from here to Kenya, to Nigeria, to India somewhere, or anywhere in the world where socialists are needing solidarity. Let's globalize solidarity, and I think socialists could lead the way. The backlash will be immense, and then you'll know that you're in a right vein because it needs to be dealt with. So that language, reflection, globalizing solidarity through practical means of engagement. I know that there are people in the Northeast who've done that by engaging activists from across the world, as it were, in Zoom calls. I know of one that happened, which was great to see. But I mean on a much grander scale. I would like to see a socialist think tank conversation with somebody from another country. I'm sure you would do it. I'm sure you could do it. And just the struggles that are happening here, if you could see a glimmer of that in other people's lives somewhere else, I mean, talk about knocking down barriers. That would knock down so many barriers just psychically, in awareness. And the last thing is there's got to be an economic question about a just settlement. And I mean a settlement. I'm not an economist, but something that's beyond an election cycle. That's something that's independent of a voting scenario. It means we all sign up as a planet, whether it's the UN, well, it'll have to be through the UN, and then into law here, that no government could overturn, which is whether it's to do with climate change, how we deal with world resources. We need a global plan of how we run our economy, and that's going to be very, very difficult to do because of the concentrations of economic power that are in the world that will not be for it. They need to be shown a different way. They need to be engaged in a different way. Obviously, this is very hopeful, very naive, and I like the fact that it's naive also because it means hope starts with naivety. There's nothing wrong with being naive because there's a sense of innocence about it and there's a sense of hope about it. It can take you through all kinds of problems, of obstacles, doubts that people put in your mind not to go down a particular track. Well, not deluding yourself, but naivety can help you travel far. So yeah, economics, transcending solidarity, self-reflection, and language, which is what we've got here, I suppose.
I think what you've described there in a really simple way is we need time to talk to one another.
Yes.
And that time to talk is something that I believe is possibly deliberately being taken away from us. We're working longer hours in spite of increased automation, and where even where people are unemployed, people are still working longer hours. And I think that's sort of part of the system that stops us communicating with each other, so that we can't stop and just go, hang on, this could be a little bit better here.
Yes. Yeah. No time for reflection. Because the power of self-reflection, the power of just reflecting on things is so immense in my view, it can carry you through your lifetime. It can carry you through several lifetimes if you believe in reincarnation, as it were. But that's another matter. But what I'm saying is we don't have time to reflect because media is hitting us left, right, and center every day. We are doing it to ourselves with the alerts that we get on our phone, the social media pages we follow, the alerts that pop up on that. But that's our own, actions. But out there in the world, we are being bombarded left, right, and center with distractions, with clickbait of stories which offer no reflection but speak to identity hypnosis. And then you're on a Twitter storm because, well, do you know what happened here and who said this? Because of a story that might even be true, because of something that's been put up. So yeah, we are being distracted left, right, and center, and there's a good reason for that, because it works. Why would distraction being used as a tactic? Why would the media be using stories about Jeremy Corbyn, was it in the 2017 election, of 13 pages in a particular paper? Why is that? Because they're not stupid. They know that hypnosis has a home, has a home somewhere in someone's psyche, of nationality, of security. And one of the most peace-loving politicians that ever became leader of the party is demonized. And because of that distraction, to allow time to reflect on his words was not given breathing space. That's a tragedy for me. And I hope that the current leader does not suffer from that challenge, because in my view, we need a Labour government. But I would add something more on top of that. We need a socialist government. You see, I'm worried about the phrase, the waving of the hands. Like, well, don't you want a Labour government? I want a Labour socialist government. Say the full sentence. You could say what's on the back of the card, democratic socialism. But that's too much of a mouthful. But yeah, that distraction we need to try and resist. So yeah, conversation between us and others, very important.
Thank you so much, Musa. I'm going to end it there because it's been a really, really informative hour or so that we've had there, and there's so much to reflect on, and it's fun to speak to you because these ideas come out of it. I've kind of come up with another couple of ideas that we could do at Socialist Think Tank, and some that you've suggested and some that have come from things that you've said that you won't have even noticed that you've given me the idea for. So
you must tell me later.
I will do. So thank you once again. It's been lovely to see you, and we will catch up soon.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much.
We'll keep the red flag flying here.